I am Ferdinand Marcos, and I am the President of the Republic of the Philippines. I stand today on behalf of 110 million Filipinos.
Hello people and hello universe. Ayan, nakikita nyo guys, oh. Yung nakikita ko, the Philippines Asia's Richest. Talaga naman totoo eh. At pinakamagandang bansa, ang bansang Pilipinas. 7,000 plus ba naman na islands eh. Ang daming magagandang tanawin. Kung ikaw ay gusto mo maglilibot, makikita mo kung gaano kaganda. See? Ang problema lang po lang kasi natin is yung mismong namumuno. Kung magaling ang namumuno sa palasyo, ang alam niya lang sana yung pagandahin ng Pilipinas, nakatutok sana sa kung paano niya palaguin ang ekonomiya ng bansa, tulungan ang mga magsasaka, 'di ba? Yung kung ganun sana ang ginawa ng mga puon nyo in the past, baka hindi tayo kulilat, baka number 1 tayo sa buong mundo. Pero dahil talamak ang korupsyon, no? Hindi nawawala po 'yan. Dahil mismo ang ibang pinuno naman, tulad na lang ng reward system, para na lang pumapatay ng tao na parang aso. Alam nyo ba yung ganong klaseng idea? Yung ganyang klaseng pamumuno? Malas kaya yun? Malas na malas yun guys. Walang walang asensado. Sa totoo lang mga kababayan, yung basta-basta ka na lang pumatay ng tao kahit walang kasalanan, tapos nadadama yung mga men in uniform, 'di ba? Himbis matino sila, nakagagawa sila ng masama dahil diyan sa pera-pera na 'yan. Ang pera hindi masama, pero gamitin mo sa tama. Hindi sa masama. 'Di ba? Malas kaya 'yun. Sa isang pinuno, kung mayroon kang kabalbala na ginagawa, katarantaduhan, nako, malas na malas talaga 'yan. Hindi talaga gaganda ang bansa. Pero kung itulad mo kay Pangulong Marcos Jr., tingnan nyo naman, mga kababayan, napapansin tayo ng ibang bansa. Ang dami po kayang mga nag-invest dito sa Pilipinas ng mga banyaga. Ang daming mga turista na pumupunta rito. Kasi guys, nakikita nila kay Pangulong Marcos Jr. Sa magaling niyang pamumuno. At napapansin yung dating Pangulong Marcos Sr. Kung ano yung galing ng ama, well, I think mas matindi ang anak. Ayan po ang hindi nakikita ng mga anti-Marcos. Kasi katulad ng sinabi ni Sarah, hindi daw magaling na Pangulo si Pangulong Marcos Jr. What the heck? 'Di ba? Kumusta naman kaya siya? Ano naman ang nagawa niya sa DepEd? 'Di ba? Iba talaga pag mayroon pag nasiraan ng bait, guys, ganun na lang mga pinagsasabi. Kaya para sa akin, sa totoo lang, si Fpfem, ay nako, wish ko lang talaga ma-extend ito. Sayang yung galing niya kasi mamuno. Tingnan nyo naman ang galaw niya, 'di ba? Puro tulong 'yan sa mga magsasaka. Ginawa ng paraan para may pag-utangan ng pera. Ayun, yung land bank. Sinabi niya sa land bank, huwag mag-required ng maraming sangkaterbang mga requirements, dapat isang pieces na papel lang. Ayun, nasunod. Edi ang saya-saya ng mga magsasaka. Tapos installment pa yung pag-uutang nila, mababang porsyento lang. Saan makikita niyang klaseng pangulo na yan? Kompleto. Kasi mahalaga talaga sa kanya ang magsasaka. Yun din naman ang ama niya eh. Tinuloy niya lang talaga. So, dahil dito mga besa, sabi dito guys ng Behind Asia, the Philippines as Asia's second richest economy, myth or fact? Social. Proud ako bilang Pilipino. Why? Kasi magaling ang Pangulo ko. Binoto ko yan. Tiniis ko lahat ng init nung sa Kalye Sorbe para lang i-promote siya, ikampanya siya. Di ba? Kaya nanalo. Marami kami. Of course, ang mga Marcos loyalists and mga taga-suporta niya na mga bago. The Philippines as Asia's second richest economy. Myth or facts? Yan, courtesy po ng Behind Asia. 'Di ba mga kababayan? Pag ito si Pangulong Marcos Jr., tuloy-tuloy ang kanyang pamumuno. Sabihin na lang natin, bigyan natin ng 3 termino. Ay, ewan ko na lang. Maraming maiinggit na iba't ibang bansa. Kasi kaya niyang palaguin, mga kababayan, at hindi lang yun. Dadami at dadami ang mga foreign investor sa Pilipinas. Pag nangyari, boom, yung isa sa pinaka mayaman ang Pilipinas sa buong mundo. Talagang lulusubin tayo talaga ng mga banyaga. For sure yan. So, dahil dito mga kababayan, kompleto detalyado, panoorin nyo po ito. But before that, don't forget to like, hit the button bell para lagi kayo update sa aking mga upload videos. At follow me guys. Bye and baboos. God bless Philippines. Eto na.
One of the most misunderstood and misrepresented aspects of Philippine economic history is the claim that the country was once Asia's second richest economy. This misconception, often repeated without verification, is particularly tied to the era of Era.Marcos, who ruled the Philippines from the mid-1960s until the mid-1980s. Many suggest that during this time, the Philippines was second only to Japan in wealth across Asia. Some even go so far as to say that the country's subsequent decline can be traced to the mismanagement of post-Marcos administrations. In reality, the story of the Philippines' economic rise and fall is far more complex, and the notion that it was ever the second richest economy in Asia is one that requires careful examination. In this video, we will explore whether or not the Philippines ever truly stood as Asia's second richest economy. If so, when this happened, and most importantly, what factors contributed to its subsequent failure to sustain such a position. Our discussion will be informed by data from the Philippine economy, development, policies, and challenges. A book edited by Arsenio M. Balisacan, a highly respected economist and current secretary of the National Economic and Development Authority, NEDA, under President Bongbong Marcos. As a professor and former dean at the University of the Philippines School of Economics, Balisacan's arguments provide one of the most authoritative perspectives on the subject. The Philippines, without a doubt, was once among the richest nations in East Asia. According to historical records, the country held one of the highest per capita income in East Asia, outpacing now successful economies such as Taiwan, South Korea, and significantly exceeding the incomes of countries like Thailand, Indonesia, and China. However, it is important to clarify that while the Philippines enjoyed a higher income per capita compared to many of its neighbors, it was still behind Japan, Malaya, modern-day Malaysia, and the city-states of Hong Kong and Singapore. Crucially, this period of economic prosperity did not occur during the 1960s as many claim, but rather much earlier, shortly after the Pacific War in the 1950s. What makes this achievement even more remarkable is the fact that the Philippines had been ravaged by World War II, with much of its infrastructure destroyed and its population suffering greatly. Yet, despite this devastation, the Philippines emerged from the ashes as one of East Asia's top economies in terms of per capita income. So, if it is indeed factual that the Philippines enjoyed higher per capita income than most of East Asia, the next logical question is, what caused this early prosperity? And why did the country fail to maintain its lead? To answer these questions, we must first understand the conditions that allowed the Philippines to prosper in the years following World War II. At the time, the Philippines was in a unique and favorable position compared to other newly independent countries in Asia. Its transition to independence was relatively peaceful and smooth, avoiding the violent struggles that plagued other nations. The country had no significant ethnic divisions, and it boasted one of the highest levels of education in the entire developing world. Additionally, its colonial ties to the United States provided access to American markets and resources, helping the country to rebuild quickly after the war. This advantageous relationship continued until 1974, when the Laurel-Langley Agreement, which ensured favorable trade terms between the two countries, expired. Unlike many of its neighbors, the Philippines also had a functioning democracy, albeit imperfect, with the rule of law in place. Corruption existed, but it was not yet at the level that would later plague the country's political and economic institutions. In addition to these favorable political and economic conditions, the Philippines possessed vast agricultural lands that sustained several decades of economic growth. Moreover, during the 1950s and 1960s, many of the countries in East Asia were in the midst of significant turmoil. The Vietnam War raged throughout the 1960s, destabilizing the region. Indonesia faced its own internal struggles, including tensions with Malaysia, while Singapore experienced a turbulent separation from Malaysia. In contrast, the Philippines was relatively stable and faced no major foreign conflicts. All of these factors contributed to the belief that the Philippines was on track to become a dominant economic power in Asia. However, despite these early advantages, the Philippines failed to capitalize on its position. By the 1970s, both Korea and Taiwan had overtaken the Philippines in terms of per capita income. In the 1980s, Thailand pulled ahead, followed by Indonesia in the 1990s and China in the 2000s. In other words, while the Philippines began with a significant lead over these nations in the early 1950s, by the end of the century, it had fallen far behind. Understanding why this happened requires a closer look at the country's economic performance over several decades. From a macroeconomic perspective, the Philippine economy posted strong growth in the 1950s, with an average gross domestic product (GDP) growth rate of 6.5%. This growth was higher than that of Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. However, from 1960 to 1970, the country's GDP growth slowed to 5.1%. Although this was still higher than Indonesia's growth rate, it was slower than that of other countries in the region, including Singapore. The real economic disaster, however, occurred in the 1980s. From 1980 to 1990, the Philippines' average GDP growth plummeted to just 1%, making it the slowest growing economy in the region, where most countries were posting growth rates of over 6%. The 1990s brought a slight recovery, with the Philippines achieving an average growth rate of 3.2%, but this was still the lowest among its regional peers. The true turning point in the Philippines' economic trajectory was the 1980s. The sharp decline in growth during this decade can be attributed to a combination of factors, but perhaps the most significant was the country's debt-driven growth strategy during the 1970s and early 1980s. The Philippine government borrowed heavily from overseas lenders to finance large-scale infrastructure projects and other development initiatives. While this strategy temporarily boosted growth, it created an unsustainable level of debt. By the mid-1980s, the country was struggling under the weight of its debt, and the economy began to slow down dramatically. This economic stagnation continued into the 1990s as the country struggled to recover from its debt crisis. In conclusion, while it is true that the Philippines was once one of the richest nations in East Asia, this period of prosperity occurred much earlier than many people realize, and the country never held the title of Asia's second richest economy during the Marcos era.
Yes.
The combination of favorable post-war conditions, access to American markets, and a stable political environment allowed the country to achieve early success. However, its failure to maintain this position can be attributed to a range of factors, including debt-driven growth, political mismanagement, and external competition.
Narinig nyo? Oo, sabi ko sa inyo Marcos lang ang sakalam at sila lang talaga ang may malasakit sa buhay, ay sa mamamayang Pilipino at sa pamumuno nila, lalo na po si Marcos, dating Pangulong Marcos Sr. Talaga naman, nakita nyo naman kung gaano kaganda ang kanyang pamumuno at ang pulso ng Pilipinas that time na talagang maganda, no? At maraming mga nagawa, mga legacy niya. Ako hanggang ngayon napapakinabangan po natin lalo na po yung yung anak sa ngayon, no? Taliwas doon sa sinabi ni Sara Duterte na hindi daw magaling na pangulo. Ay, grabe, yan tindi. Natatawa talaga ako sa kanya. Siguro baka sa sobrang stress niya, no? Sa marami yung problema, mga issue laban sa kanya, nililigaw niya lang ang taong bayan. Pero remember, hindi estatwa ang mga taong bayan, guys. Lahat yan nasa social media, 95% or 97% lahat may cellphone, kaya alam nila yung mga nangyayari, no, sa kapaligiran. So, dahil dyan, mga bes, si Pangulong Marcos Jr. ay baka mas magaling pa sa ama niya yan, no? So, dahil dito sa, sa balita na ito, talaga naman nakaka-overwhelm. Biro mo sa panahon ni Pangulong Marcos Jr., yung kanyang ama, nag-ano tayo guys, nag-export tayo ng bigas Pero nung dumating ang panahon ni Cory, wala na. Nga na ang Pinas. 'Di ba? Tapos sasabihin nyo kung mangbabatikos kay Pangulong Marcos Jr. wagas, samantalang yung mga puon nyo nga walang nagagawa kaya nilang gagawin yung ginawa ni dating Pangulong Marcos Sr. Wala, kulilat ang Pilipinas nga walang asinso, nahuhuli, kulilat. 'Di ba? Kaya nga lagi kong sinasabi sa mga nanonood ng mga anti-Marcos, bago kayo kumuda at napunain si Pangulong Marcos Jr., tingnan nyo naman yung mga sinusuportahan yung presidente ng mga nakaraan. Kung ano ba ang nagawa niya, ano bang nangyari sa Pilipinas. Di ba nga, kayo naman, oo. Lagi kong sinasabi, nakita nyo yung muta ni Pangulong Marcos Jr., pero yung gabundok na muta ng mga puon nyo, hindi nyo nakita. Ano tawag dun? Inggit. At BO-BO. Kasi nga anti-Marcos kayo, ganon. Kahit maganda yung mga nangyayari ngayong sa panahon ni Pangulong Marcos Jr., sasabihin nyo, wala, weak leader, puro kayo kainggitan lang So yun guys, ang aking pinaka-latest updates video. Maraming salamat sa inyong watching. See you again on my next upload videos. Don't forget to like and follow me guys. Marcos lang ang sakalam.